Hi, this is Refugee Part 8, and this is being read with permission from Scholastic Books. We're going to start with Joseph. It's somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean in 1939, 14 days from home. And if you remember last time, an older man died on the ship from cancer, and Joseph's father actually wanted to go to the funeral, and then some of the sailors who they'd encountered in the past came to the funeral and tried to put the Nazi flag on the casket, and the captain stopped them. The guys were pretty mad. So that's where we left off with Yosef. The boat also had to slow down for the funeral, so they were worried they wouldn't get to Cuba on time. A day out from Cuba, the St. Louis threw a party. Streamers and balloons hung from the ceiling and decorated the gallery rails of the first-class social hall. Chairs and tables were pushed aside to make room for dancers. There was a feeling of wild relief, as though they were dancing away all the stress of leaving Germany. The steward smiled with the passengers as though they understood, but none of them could really understand. Joseph thought, not until their shop windows had been smashed and their businesses had been shut down. Not until the newspapers and radio talked about them as subhuman monsters. Not until shadowy men had burst into their homes and smashed up their things and dragged away someone they loved. Not until they had been told to leave their homeland and never, ever come back. Still, Joseph enjoyed the party. He danced with his mother, while Ruth, Renata, and Evelyn ran in and out of people's legs all evening long. Joseph had been nervous about Cuba at first, scared of the unknown, but now he was excited to reach Havana to start a new life, especially if it was like this. Joseph's father had hidden away in their cabin the whole night. I'm sure this was just another Nazi trick. Next morning, the breakfast in the ship's dining room was interrupted by the thundering, clanking sound of the anchors being dropped. Joseph ran to the window. Dawn had broken, and Joseph could see the Malecon, Havana's famous seaside avenue. Stewards had told them all about its theaters and casinos and restaurants, and the Miramar Hotel, where all the waiters wore tuxedos. But the St. Louis was still a long way off from there. For some reason, the ship had anchored kilometers out from shore. It's for the medical quarantine, a doctor from Frankfurt explained to the small crowd who had gathered with Joseph at the porthole to look at Cuba. I saw them run up the yellow flag this morning before breakfast. We just have to be approved by the port's medical authorities first. Standard procedure. Joseph made sure he was on deck when the first boat from Havana Port Authority reached the St. Louis. The Cuban man who climbed the ladder to sea deck from the launch was deeply tanned and wore a lightweight white suit. Joseph watched as Captain Schroeder and the ship's doctor met the man as he came aboard. The captain swore an oath that none of the passengers was insane, a criminal, or had a contagious disease. That was apparently all that should have been required, because when the port doctor insisted he was still allowed to examine each and every passenger, Captain Schroeder looked angry. He balled his fist and breathed deeply, but he didn't object. He gave a curt order to the ship's doctor to assemble the passengers in the social hall and then marched away. Joseph ran back to his cabin and burst in on his mother packing the last of their things. Ruthie was helping her while Papa lay in the bed. The doctor from Cuba, he's going to make all the passengers go through a medical examination. Joseph told his mother, still panting from his run. They're gathering everybody in the social hall right now. Mama's shocked look told him she understood. Papa was not well. What if the Cuban doctor said he was too mentally disturbed to be allowed into Havana? Where would they go if Cuba turned them away? What would they do? Catherine asked, Papa said. He looked even more frightened by the prospect than Joseph's mother. Like a roll call? He stood up, backed against the wall. No, he said, the things that happen at roll call, the hangings, the floggings, the drownings, the beatings. He wrapped his arms around himself, and Joseph knew his father was talking about that place, Dachau. Joseph and his mother stood like statues, afraid to break the spell. Once I saw another man shot dead with a rifle, his father whispered. He was standing right beside me. And I couldn't move, couldn't make a sound, or I would be next. It's not going to be like that, dear heart, Mama said. She reached out to him tentatively, gently, and he didn't flinch under her hand. You were strong once before in that place. We need you to be strong again, and then we'll be in Cuba. We'll be safe forever, all of us. It was clear to Joseph that his father was still lost in his memories of Dachau as they led him to the social hall. Papa looked frightened and jittery. It scared Joseph when his father got this way, but he was even more scared that the doctor would see Papa's condition and then turn them away. Joseph and his family joined the other passengers standing in rows, and the doctor walked among them. Papa stood beside Joseph, and as the doctor got closer, Joseph's father began to make a low keening sound like a wounded dog. Papa was starting to attract attention, the attention of the passengers around them. Joseph felt a bead of sweat roll down his back underneath his shirt, and Ruthie cried softly. Be strong, my love, Joseph heard his mother whisper to his father. Be strong like you were before. But I wasn't, Yosef's father blubbered. I wasn't strong. I was just lucky. It could have been me. It should have been me. The Cuban doctor was getting closer. Yosef had to do something. But what? His father was inconsolable. The things he said he saw, Yosef couldn't even imagine. His father had only survived by staying quiet, by not drawing attention to himself. But now he was going to get them all sent away. Suddenly, Yosef knew what he had to do. He slapped his father across the face, hard. Papa staggered in surprise. Yosef felt just as shocked as his father looked. Yosef couldn't believe what he'd done. 6 months ago, he never would have dreamed of striking any adult, let alone his father. Papa would have punished him for such disrespect. In the past 6 months, Yosef and his father had traded places. Papa now was the one acting like a child, and Yosef was the adult. Mama and Ruthie stared at Yosef, stunned, but he ignored them and pulled his father back in line. You want the Nazis to catch you? You want them to send you back to that place? Yosef hissed at Papa. No. His father said, still dazed. That man there? Yosef whispered, pointing to the doctor. He's a Nazi in disguise. He decides who goes back to Dachau. He decides who lives and who dies. If you're lucky, he won't choose you. But if you speak, if you move, if you make even the slightest sound, he will pull you out of line and send you back. Do you understand? Yosef's father nodded urgently. Beside him, Mama put her hand to her mouth and wept, but she didn't say anything. Now, clean yourself up, quickly, Yosef told his father. Aaron Landau dropped his wife's hand, dragged his oversized coat sleeve across his face, and stood rigidly at attention, eyes forward, like a prisoner. The doctor came down their row, looking at each person in turn. When he got to Papa, Yosef held his breath. The doctor looked Yosef's father up and down, then moved on. Yosef sagged with relief. They'd made it. His father had passed the doctor's inspection. Yosef closed his eyes, fought back tears of his own. He felt terrible for scaring his father like that, for making Papa's fears worse instead of better. And he felt terrible for taking his father's place as the man in the family. All of Yosef's life, he had looked up to his father, idolized him. Now it was hard to see him as anything but a broken old man. But all that would change when they got off his ship and into Cuba. And everything would go back to normal. They would find a way to fix his father. The Cuban doctor finished his rounds and nodded to the ship's doctor that he approved the passengers. Yosef's mother wrapped his father in a hug, and Yosef felt his heart lift. For the first time all afternoon, he felt hope. Well, that was a sham, said the man standing in line next to him. What do you mean? Yosef asked. That was no kind of medical inspection. The entire business was a charade, a giant waste of time. Yosef didn't understand. If it wasn't a proper medical inspection, what had it been for? He understood when he and his family lined up on the ladder at sea deck to leave the ship. The Cuban doctor was gone, and he'd left Cuban police officers behind in his place. They were blocking the only way off of the ship. We passed our medicals and we all have the right papers, a woman passenger said to the police. When will we be allowed into Havana? Mañana, the policeman said in Spanish. Yosef didn't speak Spanish. She didn't know what mañana meant. Tomorrow, one of the other passengers translated for them. Not today, tomorrow. So just like the boat from Mahmoud's family, tomorrow. Okay, now we're on to Isabel in the Straits of Florida, somewhere north of Cuba. So there had been this big boat that was coming towards their little boat, and the engine wouldn't start. Finally, the engine started. They got out of the way of the big boat, and Senor Castillo, Ivan's dad, had fallen overboard, and Isabel jumped in after him. This is 1994, and they are one day away from home. Isabel hit the water and sank into the warm Gulf Stream. It was pitch black all around her, and the ocean was alive. Not alive with fish, alive like the ocean was a living creature itself. It turned and roared with bubbles and foam. It beat at her, pushing her and pulling her like a cat, playing with the mouse it was about to eat. Isabel fought her way back to the surface and gasped for air. Isabel, her mother shrieked, her arms stretching out for her. But there was no way her mother could reach her. The boat was already so far away. Isabel panicked. How is it so far away already? We have to get the boat turned, Isabel heard Louise cry. If we don't meet the waves head on, they'll roll us over. Dad, Ivan yelled. Isabel spun in the water, and a wave slammed into her, filling her mouth and nose with salty water and sweeping her under again. The wave passed, and she broke the surface, gagging and choking. But she was already moving toward the place where she had seen Senor Castillo's head before it went under. Her hands struck something dark in the water, and Isabel recoiled until she realized it was Senor Castillo. The sea was tossing him around, but he wasn't moving on his own, wasn't fighting to get back out of water. Isabel took in as much air as she could, dove down beneath an oncoming wave. She found Senor Castillo's body in the dark, wrapped her arms around him, and kicked as hard as she could for the surface. The ocean fought her, sweeping her legs out from under her and spinning her all around. But Isabel kicked, until her lungs were about to burst, and at last she exploded up into the cold air, gasping. There they are, Ivan cried. Isabel couldn't even try to look for the boat. It was all she could do to keep Senor Castillo's lolling head above the water. and catch quick breaths before the waves rolled over them both. But the waves seemed to be smaller now, still deadly, but not as high and fast. Isabel began to feel the rhythm of the sea, the sing-song lullaby of it, and it was easy to close her eyes, stop kicking, and stop fighting. She was so tired, so very, very tired. Then Ivan was there in the water with him, his arms around her like they were back in their village playing together in the waves on the beach. Here, here, they're here, Ivan shouted. Her boat was now alongside her. Her head thumped into the side of it as a wave washed over her. Hands lifted Senora Castillo from her, and soon they dragged her over the side too. She splashed back down into the half-meter of water that filled the boat. It's like 18 inches, a foot and a half. She was away from the waves, the never-ending waves. She collapsed into her mother's arms. Rudy, Rudy, oh God! Senora Castillo cried, clutching her husband's hand. Senora Castillo was unconscious. Luis and Papi had laid him on one of the benches, and Luis's grandfather was pumping his stomach like an accordion. Water burbled up out of Senora Castillo's mouth, and he suddenly lurched, coughing and sputtering. Lito and Papi and Luis rolled him over, and he rushed up the rest of the ocean he'd swallowed. Rudy, Rudy, Senora Castillo said. She wrapped him in her arms and sobbed, and then everything was quiet and still, but for the gentle lapping of the sea against the side of the boat and the sloshing of water inside it. The tanker had passed. Mara stood at the back of the boat, keeping the rudder straight against the waves, but the engine was dead again. Like everything else, it had been swamped. Senora Castillo reached for Isabel's hand and squeezed it. Thank you, Isabel. Isabel nodded, but it came out more like a shudder. She was freezing cold and soaked from head to toe, but at least she was back in her mother's arms. Mommy hugged her close, and Isabel shivered. We need to get the water out of the bottom of the boat, Papi said. It was strange to Isabel to hear her father talk about something so normal, so practical, when Senor Castillo had almost drowned and the boat had almost rolled over and sunk. But he was right. And get the engine started again, Ivan said. Water first, Lito agreed. And together they gathered up bottles and jugs and began the tedious work of filling them and pouring the seawater back into the ocean. Isabel stayed buried in her mother's arms, still exhausted, and no one made her get up. Where's the box with the medicine in it? Luis asked. There weren't too many places it could be in the small boat, and they quickly decided it must have fallen overboard in the confusion. Gone were the aspirin and bandages, and Senor Castillo was still dazed and weak. It was bad, but if they got the boat bailed out, and if they got the engine running, and if they got back on track with the sun tomorrow, and if they didn't run into any more tankers, they could make it to the United States without needing the medicines or matches. They bailed water the rest of the night, taking turns dozing in the uncomfortable, crowded little boat. Isabel didn't even realize until she fell asleep didn't even realize she'd fallen asleep until she jerked awake from a nightmare about a giant sea monster coming out for her from the dark sea. She cried out, looking this way and that, but there was nothing but blue-black water and gray skies tinged with the red of sun all around them for miles and miles. She closed her eyes and took deep breaths, trying to calm down. The boat rocked again, and Amara struggled to keep the rudder steady. She had taken over as pilot while Senora Castillo recovered, but they still hadn't gotten the motor running again. The Gulf Stream would carry them north toward Florida, but they would need the engine to reach the shore. Isabel's mother leaned over the side of the boat and threw up into the sea. When she slid back down inside, she looked green. The boat was rocking so much now Isabel couldn't sit on the bench without holding on. The waves were going higher and higher. What is it? Ivan said sleepily. Another tanker? No. Red sky at morning. Sailors take warning, Lito said, looking up into the red-tinged clouds. A storm is coming. All right, now on to Mahmoud. Now remember, they kept being told their boat was going to come tomorrow, and then they were kind of kicked out of the place they were staying. And now, finally, the boat's there. God help us, is that what we're to ride in? Mahmoud's father said. The boat wasn't a boat. It was a raft, a black inflatable rubber dinghy with an outboard motor on the back. It looked like there was room for a dozen people on it. 30 refugees waited to get on board. They all looked as tired as Mahmoud felt and wore different colored life jackets. They were mostly young men, but there were families too. Women with and without hijabs. Other children, some who looked to be about Mahmoud's age. One boy in a Barcelona soccer jersey that didn't have a life jacket but clung instead to a blow-up rubber inner tube. A few of the other refugees had backpacks and plastic bags full of clothes, but most of them, like Mahmoud's family, carried whatever they owned in their pockets. Let's go, one of the smugglers said. 250,000 Syrian pounds, or 100 euros per person. Children pay full price, including babies, he told Mahmoud's father. There were two Turks in tracksuits like the ones who had turned them away at the mall, and they stood apart, staring at the refugees like they were something disgusting that had just washed up on the beach. Their scowls made Mahmoud want to disappear again. Dad handed out their life jackets, and they put them on. Mom stared at the black dinghy bobbing in the gray-black Mediterranean seawater. She grabbed her husband's arm. What are we doing, Yosef? Is this the right decision? We have to get to Europe, he said. What choice do we have? God will guide us. Mahmoud watched as his father pushed the cash they'd saved into the hands of one of the smugglers. Then Mahmoud and his family followed his dad to the dinghy, and they climbed on board. Walid and his mother sat down in the bottom of the dinghy, his mother holding Hana tight in her arms. Mahmoud and his father sat on one of the inflated rubber edges, their backs to the sea. Mahmoud was already cold, and the wind off the waves made him shiver. A big bearded man wearing a plaid shirt and bulky blue life vest sat down right next to Mahmoud, almost squeezing Mahmoud right off the edge. Mahmoud slid a little closer to his father, but the big man next to him just settled into the extra space. How long will we be on the boat? Mahmoud asked his dad. Just a few hours, I think. It's hard to tell on the phone. Mahmoud nodded. The phones and chargers were safely sealed away in plastic bags in his parents' pockets, just in case they got wet. Mahmoud knew because he'd been the one who dug through the trash for the reusable zipper bags. We don't have to get all the way to the Greek mainland, Dad said. Just the Greek island of Lesbos, 100 kilometers away. Then we're officially in Europe and we can take a ferry from there to Athens. When the smugglers had packed the dinghy full of refugees, they pushed it out to the sea. None of the smugglers came with them. If the refugees were going to get to Lesbos, they had to do it themselves. Does anyone know if dinner's served on this cruise? His father asked, and there were a few nervous laughs. The outboard motor roared to life, and the refugees cheered and cried. Dad hugged Mahmoud, and then reached down to hug Mom, Walid, and Hana. They were finally doing it. They were finally leaving Turkey for Europe. Mahmoud looked around and wondered. None of this seemed real. He had begun to feel like they were never going to leave. Mahmoud had been so tired he could barely keep his eyes open before. But now the thrum of the motor and the chop of the boat was hit as it hit the wave after wave flooded him with adrenaline, and he couldn't have slept if he wanted to. The lights of Izmir dwindled to glittering dots behind them, and soon they were out in the dark, rough waters of the Mediterranean. Phone screens glowed in the darkness, passengers checking to see if they could tell where they were. The roar of the engine and the whip-blinding sea spray made it impossible to have any kind of conversation, so Mahmoud looked around at the other passengers instead. Most of them kept their heads down and eyes closed, either muttering prayers or trying not to get sick, or both. The dinghy began to toss, not just front to back, but side to side, a sort of rolling motion, and Mahmoud felt the bile rise in the back of his throat. On the other side of the dinghy, a man shifted quickly to vomit over the side. Watch out for the Coast Guard, the big man next to Mahmoud shouted over the noise. The Turks will take us back to Turkey, but Greeks will take us to Lesbos. Mahmoud didn't know how anybody could see anything in the dark, cloud-covered night, but it helped his seasickness to look outside instead of inside the boat. It didn't help his growing sense of panic, though. He couldn't see land anymore. Just stormy gray waves that were getting taller and narrower, like they were driving the boat through spiky tent tops in the Kilis refugee camp. More people leaned over the side to throw up, and Mahmoud felt his stomach churn. Then the rain began. It was a hard, cold rain that plastered Mahmoud's hair to his head and soaked him down to his socks. The rain began to collect in the bottom of the dinghy, and soon Mahmoud's mother and the others were sitting in centimeters of shifting water. Mahmoud's muscles began to ache from shivering and holding the same tight position for so long, and he wanted nothing more than to get off his boat. We should turn back, someone yelled. No, we can't go back. We can't afford to try again, Mahmoud's father yelled, and a chorus of voices agreed with him. They pushed on through the driving rain and roiling seas for what felt like an eternity. It might have been 10 hours or 10 minutes. Mahmoud didn't know. All he knew was that he wanted it to end and end now. This was worse than Aleppo, worse than bombs falling and soldiers shooting and drones buzzing overhead. In Aleppo, at least, he could run and hide. Here he was at the mercy of nature, an invisible brown speck in an invisible black rubber dinghy in the middle of a great black sea. If it wanted to, the ocean could open its mouth and swallow him, and no one in the whole wide world would ever know he was gone. That's exactly what did it. Then that's exactly what did it. I see rocks, someone said in the front of the dinghy yelled, and there was a loud boom like a bomb exploding, and Mahmoud went tumbling into the sea. So that's where we're going to stop for today, and it's kind of interesting that they're all on the ocean now, traveling that way. So that's where we are for today. We stopped on page 46. So we've read for this section, I should have told you at the beginning, page 129 to 146.